In this video, I'm going to look at options for creating animations that are completely free. I'm looking at free forever tools, not time limited, not feature limited, and no subscription required. I'm going to be looking at some tools that are currently available and then introduce an alternative which I've been working on for the last month or so. It's something I've used for creating some of my own animations, and I'm looking to see if this is something that is worth developing and whether other people will find it useful too. Or do you have any other suggestions? Tools that I've missed that are already better? If so, please leave a comment, as I'd be happy to use an existing tool if there's something that already meets my needs and saves me the development time. The first questions are what, why and where. What do I mean about animations? In this context, I'm looking at tools that can create 2D animations that can be used in videos. Why? Because I'm looking at adding a bit more life into my YouTube videos. And where is that I'm wanting something that I can run on my local computer. I don't want it stuck on some cloud service that I can't get to, or where someone else controls my access. Which brings me on to my next point, that free is not always free. Just Google for creating 2D animations and you'll find lots of links to cloud-based animation tools, many of which are free, but come with restrictions. It could be that you can only create so many animations a month, that the videos include a watermark, or some other restrictions such as the maximum number of objects. Essentially, they are out to make money, and for that you need to subscribe to a premium tool. While I don't have an issue with that, I usually prefer open source tools, but I'm happy to pay for software if it meets a specific need. My concern is more about vendor lock-in. I've been bitten in the past with proprietary formats. I can no longer read some of my soft copy files from my first college course, either because they're no longer supported, or I would have to buy additional software just to read them. Cloud products are an even bigger risk. If you stop paying the subscription, or if the company goes bankrupt, you may find it impossible to get your original creative work. So for this reason, I'm only looking at open source software here. So what is currently available that is free and open source software? I'm going to look at 3 software applications. The first, you may not even consider an animation tool, which is LibreOffice. The second is a specialist 2D animation tool called Synfig Studio, and the third is Blender, a fully featured, powerful animation tool. Each of these have their pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses, and I've used all 3 in my past videos, some more than others, but none have fully met my needs, or at least take too long to achieve my aims. Which brings me on to the last thing, which is about creating animations in code. If you can write simple code, then you can animate. This isn't surprising, as anyone who started using Scratch can testify, but I'm looking at creating animations using simple Python, and perhaps even making it simpler than that, as I'm also considering a simplified description language combined with a set of instructions that allows you to create powerful animations without needing to understand a programming language. I'm now going to go into more details of the existing tools and show some of these in action. Let's just recap. Here's the main tools that I'm going to consider. LibreOffice. This is the free and open source Office suite which is included as standard across many Linux distributions. There are 2 applications within that suite that you could use. LibreOffice Draw, which is good if you want to create frame-by-frame animations, and LibreOffice Impress, which is good for creating transitions and animated text. Unfortunately, neither of these allow direct export to video, which is why you need to use these with a screen capture tool. Synfig Studio is a dedicated 2D animation program. It's difficult to learn, but can give good results. Blender is a very powerful animation tool. Better known for 3D modelling, it can be used to create 2D animations, which is something I've created a video on before. More about that later. Finally, the tool I'm working on is called PGZ Animation. It's based around Pygame 0, which makes it much easier than most of the programming languages. But it's still a basic concept at the moment, so I'd like to know what you think and whether it's worth developing further. I'm going to show you each of these tools, their pros and cons, and where they can be useful. For LibreOffice, I'm really looking at Impress, although you could use Draw to create individual frames. Impress is the LibreOffice presentation application, the free alternative to Microsoft PowerPoint. LibreOffice Impress doesn't provide a way to create video animations on its own. can however use another tool to capture the screen whilst running the presentation to create a video file. Simple Screen Recorder, as shown here, is for Linux, but you can find other capture programs for other operating systems. Whilst you may be thinking that's not a proper animation program, and that it doesn't support keyframes and tweens, it does however provide some simple transitions that can make videos more interesting. In fact, almost every video I've created has used either LibreOffice Impress or LibreOffice Draw to some extent, and this video so far has been created using this combination of LibreOffice Impress and Simple Screen Recorder. The great thing about LibreOffice is that it's easy to use and you can create the animation quickly. So, despite its limitations, it's something I plan to continue to use. You've seen some of the animation effects in this video so far, but here's a short video link showing how I used LibreOffice to create a simple animation showing how digital logic circuits work. This is fairly basic as it doesn't use any fancy transitions, but it did mean that I didn't take much time to create. Note that the 3D effects, including the text, were done in an external application. In this case, it was in Tinkercad. The next is Synfig Studio, which is a real 2D animation program. It provides keyframes and can create tweens between frames. It does, however, take a steep learning curve and is not particularly intuitive. It includes the ability to export as video, and it is a powerful tool. It can certainly do more than you can do in Impress, but it feels like it takes so long to get things done. This may be due to my unfamiliarity with the tool. I've created about 6 different animations with Synfig, but I feel I'm only just learning it. Something that would be easy in Impress, such as changing a font and font size, are much less intuitive in Synfig Studio. It does, however, have some features that would not be possible, or at least be very difficult to do in Impress. One example is when I had Synfig draw a line to show a wire between a Raspberry Pi and a Pico. Here's some examples of animations I've created using Synfig Studio. One of my earliest Synfig based videos was also used in the digital electronics animation. This shows values being placed into a microcontroller. It's quite crude, but adds a degree of animation that would not have been possible using Impress. Here's the video I created showing the wiring up from a Raspberry Pi and a Pico. It could probably be improved using B-spline curves rather than my hand-drawn lines, but it shows how the line is set to reveal over time. The last of the existing applications is Blender. You've probably heard of Blender as a 3D animation tool, but as of version 2.8 they added a 2D animation mode. The 2D animation mode doesn't really add anything that wasn't available in 3D mode, but it does make it a little bit more accessible and easier to start. Blender has a really steep learning curve thanks to its complexity. It has much more levels of complexity than other tools. One thing about Blender is that there's no shortage of books and tutorials, although few actually cover using Blender for 2D animations, other than how artists can use grease pencil for hand-drawn animations. I've created my own video showing the steps to animate a plane flying across the screen. I've also created other videos showing the more advanced techniques using the shader editor. These are included in the description if you want to go and view these. This clip is from my first tutorial on Blender 2D animation. It shows an image of a plane flying across the screen. A more advanced video explains how to use the shader editor, in this case to create bullet holes in a plane to show parts of the background through the image. And this shows a short clip I created as part of my video on a Mechanim robot, showing how changing the direction of the wheels results in the robot going in a specific direction. Whilst these are all great tools, they each have their own pros and cons. There's a trade-off between ease of use and functionality. Because these use a graphical interface to set all the parameters, then it can be difficult to create recurring events. I'd basically split these into 2 categories. The first having limited functionality, but are very easy to use, which is LibreOffice. And those with more functionality, but difficult to use and time consuming, which is where I'd put Synfig and Blender. I do understand that Blender is programmable through an API, but considering the depth and complexity within Blender, I'm not sure that's really going to make life much easier. Something that I may look into further in future. But before I move on to my own project, I'd be interested to hear what other people use. Is there another animation application which is easy to use? Is there a simple guide to programming with the Blender API? If so, please post details in the comments. It would be useful to know before I spend too much time developing my alternative. There are specific examples of animations I wanted to create, which I knew would take a long time to create using the animation tools, but that I could code quite easily in Pygame 0. This is something I've done before when I created some animations using the processing language. These were for electronics tutorials on my website. Using processing, I created web applets which could run in a web browser, but due to changes in the way Java is no longer integrated into the browser, means that these stopped working for most users. The idea I have now is similar to what I did then, but looking to turn these into video animations. Whilst processing as a language is still around, these static images are the ones I've been using on my electronics tutorials on my website since the applet stopped working, something I hope to change soon. I've become a big fan of Pygame 0 since its early days, around 2015 or 2016. So why did I switch to Pygame 0 and what does that provide? Pygame 0 is based around Pygame, but it's designed to make programming easier. It's designed for new programmers so that they can create their own computer games, but it also works well for creating animations. After all, games are just animating things on the screen, but with built-in interactivity. Pygame 0 is easier to learn than Pygame. It removes much of the boilerplate code, which is the code you need to enter to get started with Pygame. However, you still have access to most of the flexibility of Pygame, including the ability to create PNG images, which can then be used to make a video, or can be used on my RGB LED matrix display. So what I wanted to do was create a more object-oriented set of animation tools that allows for tweens and other animation techniques. The idea is to make it even easier to create animations. It would actually depend on what you want to achieve, whether that meets its goals. You still have a lot of flexibility, but the more complex you want the animation, the more complex the code becomes. Although if you just want to rely on keyframes and absolute positioning, all the complexity can happen behind the scenes. So what does PGZ Animation provide? It's designed for programmers that want to create their own videos using programming code. However, you don't need to be a programmer to use it, or at least that's the eventual aim. It's not quite there yet. It's designed to make repetition easy. Through this, I'm particularly thinking about having the ability to create loops, so part of the animation can continue to run over and over again, perhaps with interaction from other elements. I've tried to make it close to Pygame 0 so that those who have learned Pygame 0 can use this, but whilst Pygame 0 uses objects for some elements, such as actors, this code turns all elements into objects, or at least almost all. If it makes it easy to handle some items without using objects, then I'll do that. Since I started talking about PGZ Animation, then the last 3 slides you have seen have all been generated using PGZ Animation. The essential parts of the code for one of these slides is shown in this screenshot. This is not all the code needed to make the slideshow. There's about 100 lines needed in total, but this shows the main changes that are needed to make by the user. In future, this may be extracted into an easier format, but at the moment it's just some simple Python code. Bullets 1 is a list of the bullet points to be displayed. Slides is a list of the different slides to show. In this case, a bullet slide. It has the title and refers to the list of bullet points mentioned previously. There's some additional options which go off the side of the screen, but many of them are optional. You then need to call show_slide with the frame numbers that you want the slide displayed, and then animate slide with the frames during which the animation will happen. There are other options, as you could add specific time into the animation of the bullets, or you can set it so the bullets are automatic versus using the mouse to advance to the next bullet. But the basics are only a few lines of code. But for me, it's the coding opportunity which allows more flexibility. This is a scripted demonstration of a game of Pong. This is created using code by listing where each element needs to be in terms of frames. There's around 10 lines of code to create the objects and set up the game, then about 12 to actually animate the game. The real reason I was creating this was to be able to demonstrate electrical theory, electronic circuits, and how devices can communicate. This example shows pulse width modulation, which I created for an explanation of how you can interface an RC airplane controller with a Raspberry Pi Pico. This involves a bit more coding in that each of the lines are made up of smaller line objects. But the advantage of this is that once created, it's easier to show PWM duty cycles and to have the video looping over multiple times. And of course, being based on Pygame 0, you can create animations based around game sprites. This example shows a space battle with pixel-based sprites trying to attack each other. And this is a demonstration of what I had in mind when I started working on this. This circuit simulator shows a simple switch electronic circuit. All the hard work for this is done in the background using the PGZ Animation library. It just takes a few lines of definitions and code to make this simulator. Hopefully I'll be able to make this work for other educational videos as well. What do you think? Do you think this library will be useful? If so, please give the video a thumbs up and perhaps leave a comment. If you don't think it's going to be useful, then please leave a comment anyway. Explain why you don't think this will be useful. Unless I find something else that is easier to use, then I'm probably going to develop this a little further for myself anyway. But there's a big difference between what is needed if I'm using it myself and if others are going to use it too. So I'd like to get an idea of people's response before I decide how much time to spend on that. If you want to give it a try, the code is freely available on GitHub with some documentation on my website. Beware that the code is in early development. It certainly has bugs in it, and the code is likely to change in a way which could potentially break animations that you create. There's also currently not much documentation. This is likely to change in future, especially if I get a positive response. But please be aware of this if you're going to have a go at this early stage. That's it for now. I'll be creating a video in future on how to get started with the PGZ Animation library. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification icon to get notified when I release a future video. I look forward to seeing you again in a future video.